I invite you to turn with me in your Bibles, if you've not already, during the reading that we had just a moment ago, to Mark chapter 5. We're roaring right along. Mark chapter 5. While you're turning there, I want you to think about what we've been doing and what has happened over the last week, and then what will happen again today. Last week, we talked about Emmanuel, God with us. And we got to see a really great illustration of what it means for God to be with us in Christ as we looked at how Jesus was teaching on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. He finished up. He went through the parables that we saw. Excuse me. He gets into a boat and he goes across the sea. While he's out in the deep area, a storm whips up, which I mentioned last week. It's pretty common for storms to whip up on the Sea of Galilee. But Mark kind of frames this in a way that there's a sinister element about it, as if Jesus is trying to be prevented from going across. And nevertheless, Jesus is in the boat. The wind whips up. The waves are going crazy to the point that right there at the beginning, the boat is about to be swamped. Mark tells us that right off the bat. Peter is in the boat. Peter sees that. He tells Mark that when he's writing his letter. And so we get this imminent destruction in the water that's coming into the boat. Jesus, for his part, is taking a snooze. Jesus is in the stern of the boat, laying on a mattress, having a nice nap, which is pretty crazy. Unless you're God. But even more so, unless you've got total trust in God. And so Jesus gives us this perfect picture of perfect peace by trusting in God completely. And as he is awakened by the disciples who are frantic, who are upset, they don't understand why Jesus is able to sleep or why he is sleeping at that, and why he's not doing something if he's got this power. And so Jesus gets up and he does something. And he demonstrates his sovereignty over all of creation, all of nature, on the storms that were whipping up around them. And we were able to see and get a picture of what it looks like for us as we are dealing with the storms of life, the circumstances around us, the things that come at us, that Jesus' intent for us is to experience perfect peace as we trust in God. And the thing about this is, and you and I know this, the storms don't always stop. Jesus doesn't always stand up and say, peace, be still in the storms in your life. The circumstances around you doesn't always happen. It doesn't mean that just because this is the last Sunday in 2020 that come next Sunday, we are free and clear, man, because it's 2021. We've been dying for this. We've been waiting for this. 2021 is coming and everything will be okay. All of the storms will be stilled. That's not the case. But what we do see, what we do know, and what we can believe in is that the God who is sovereign over the storms around us is also sovereign over the storms within us. And so today what we're going to see is that very thing. A picture of what happens when Jesus calms a different kind of storm. Not the kind that wages around us, but the kind that can wage within our own souls, within our hearts. The overcoming of the sin and the evil that creeps in and tries to destroy us from the inside out. It's a very important thing because God is sovereign over all of creation, including his creation in us. And so I hope that you'll be encouraged as we round out 2020 and we start into a new year, which as far as we know could be worse than 2020, God help us. And that's the key, is that God will help us. So looking into this section, chapter 5, looking at verses 1 through 20, as we break this down and see what God has for us, we see the opening line, the opening verse, they came to the other side of the sea, to the region of the Gerasenes. Surely you have read a lot about the Gerasenes. They've landed here in this region. This is, as you saw in the passage, it's the Gentile Decapolis now, which literally means 10 cities. So what you've got is you've got a picture of several cities together on the western side of the Jordan River. And this is where Jesus lands. And specifically, the setting is close to the shore of a town called Kursi. Curcia is right there on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. It's where scholars believe that Jesus specifically landed. It was referred to as an important Roman harbor, a settlement and a harbor. So the implication that we get is there's probably a lot of people right there in that region. And there are not only people who live there, but people who are coming in and out because of commerce. And I think it's going to be very important for us to understand why it was significant that Jesus came to this region. But first, I want us to look at what actually happened, and then we'll circle back around to that. So, verse 1 opens where he lands. Verse 2 is where the action starts immediately, because he says, as soon as he got out of the boat. There's no break in the action. He gets out, and immediately something happens. You get a man with an unclean spirit who comes out of the tombs to meet him. Now, let's say you land on the shore of some lake and you get out and immediately you look to the cemetery and some crazy guy is coming at you. How are you going to feel about that? So immediately there's something very strange about this. There's something going on, and I cannot imagine what was going through the minds of his followers as they had gotten out of the boats and they see this happening, and it gets even weirder than that. So he gets out, and then verse 3 tells us that he lived in the tombs, and nobody was able to restrain him, not even with chains, because he had been bound and he just broke them loose. No one was strong enough to subdue him, and day and night it tells us that he was in the tombs and on the mountains wailing, crying out, and cutting himself with stones. So the very first thing that happens when Jesus gets out of the boat is he's confronted with evil. A man with an unclean spirit who is tormented night and day. Now, when I just say that last part, a man who is tormented night and day, probably some of you can already start relating to this story. You can already feel this. When I say and I read that this man was tormented day and night by what was going on inside him, you get it because you are being tormented day and night. You're dealing with something from the inside out. So I believe there is a word for you. There's an encouragement for you. But here's what I want you to notice first. The story does not say that the man is evil per se. It says he has an evil spirit. Now, I'm not in any way going to be knocking down the doctrine of total depravity. We are all born in sin. But there's a different thing that's going on here, and there's a different thing that we have to understand. He is a man with an unclean spirit. But he is a man who has been created in the image of God. He bears the image of the Most High, but he is held captive by an evil spirit. And when you're held captive by an evil spirit, you do evil things. And this is where this man was. Notice how he's described. He lived among the tombs. He lived among the dead rather than among the living. He lived out where there was no accountability and also where there was no life. He withdrew. Perhaps he was shunned. But regardless, because of what was going on the inside, he pushed away from the land of the living. He pushed away from where the signs of life are. And he withdrew. How many people, when they begin to go through this, when they become tormented by evil, when they begin to give in to sin, when they start to see what's going on in their lives, how they start to withdraw and they move away from the land of the living and start to move into the tombs, where nobody can see them, nobody will give them accountability, nobody is there to love them and encourage them. This man was absolutely alone. He was pushed off to the side, and he was in anguish privately. He dealt with private anguish. He was also destructive to himself and others. And the town people tried to restrain him, but the power of evil over his life broke the chains and left him in chaos. There was no human strength, this word tells us, that was enough to overpower the demon-empowered man. It was just too strong. Man, I've seen so many people who were held captive by sin and nothing could break them free. How many times somebody would try to approach them? These are people who are loving people who are good people. And yet when they start to become shrouded with this evil around them, and they start to be sold this bill of goods, and they start to give themselves over to this, There's nothing that you can say or do that pulls them back. There's nothing that you can do that can change their mind or change their direction. It's like you're absolutely powerless to speak into this person's life. This is kind of what was going on here. This was a man that everyone, they cared for this man. Apparently, they were trying to hold him, not for their own protection only, but also for himself, because it tells us that he was hurting himself. And so they tried to bind him. They tried to hold him still. But this man, he would break free, and then he would go and he would get engaged in self-destructive behavior. This man was one who, though unable to be bound, was completely held captive. He wasn't enjoying a liberated life, free of religion or morals or law or anything like that. He was completely captive, and he was completely miserable. This demon was not providing an enjoyable life that's so often promised by sin. It was actually in the process of killing him. It had not killed him, but it was in the process of killing him, first his soul and eventually his body, and that's the nature of sin. Where evil in the world promises all these things, and yet as we give into it, we find ourselves looking for places to hide in the dark. Hanging out among the dead, the spiritually dead, engaged in a pattern of self-destruction. And that's what John 3 tells us. John chapter 3, verses 19 to 20. This is the judgment, he tells us. The light has come into the world, and people loved darkness rather than the light. Why? Because their deeds were evil. For everyone who does evil hates the light and avoids it so that his deeds may not be exposed. I mean, think about this. Think about this in your own life. Somebody that you love, when they begin to give in to themselves or give into the evil around them, anything from porn to just other things on the internet, or people who have affairs, they don't come out in the light and say, hey, guess what I did? They try to keep it hidden. They try to keep it in under wraps, right? Usually, people come out of the darkness not because they want to come out of the darkness, but because they've been exposed. And it usually doesn't go very well. But this is the nature of evil. This is the nature of what happens. We hide in the dark. And even worse, we are self-destructive. Verse 5 tells us that night and day he was crying out and cutting himself with stones. I don't know if that was the demon within him or if that was just the anguish he felt because of what was going on inside him. It's probably a combination of both. But it was interesting as I thought about that, how that is even something that we experience in our world. So many people who have experienced pain and guilt, and they've engaged in this practice of cutting. It's not all that crazy. It was happening all the way back then. It's self-torment due to being tormented by evil, and it's an effort to cope. John 10:10 is a passage that I go to a lot because it gives us a picture of what Satan is up to. The first part, it says the thief. And Jesus here is, of course, referring to Satan. In Mark chapter 3, he calls him the strong man, which is an appropriate description, that he's the strong man. But the thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. He only wants to distort and destroy the divine likeness in man. And he ultimately wants to kill him body and soul, and he'll use any means to do it. So I don't want you to think that Satan is in the world, the demons are in the world to make you feel bad. They're not here to ruin your day. I mean, they are, but it's so much worse than that. They're not here just to make you snap at somebody you love. Ultimately, they want to kill you. They want to destroy you. We get a picture of that in this story in just a few minutes. But they want to kill you. So I'm going to ask you at this point, have you fallen for the lie of the evil one? Have you bought into this belief, this line that tells us that if we just engage in things that satisfy our soul, satisfy our flesh, that we'll be satisfied in our soul? That there's great promise in letting yourself go and following after your desires, the desires of your flesh. And you assume because you believe that it's going to lead to greater satisfaction and greater freedom. to liberation so that you're free to do what you want to do. It never turns out like that. Never. In the end, there's always destruction. It's usually over the horizon, around the bend that you can't see, and it destroys us. It's like, skydivers who do base jumping. You've heard of base jumping? It's crazy people who put parachutes and they jump off the edge of cliffs and they're kind of like gliding right next to it, or tall buildings or whatever, and they do it in a single bound. And they just throw themselves off. And then at some point, which usually is not too late, they pull the cord and poof, and they float down. Well, there's a whole different breed of crazy with base jumpers who use these wingsuits. Have you seen those? YouTube it, it's awesome. But anyway, so they've got these suits on and they base jump, but instead of pulling the cord, they flap their wings out, their arms and legs. So they stick it out like this, and the wind catches them and they just, they shoot off like Superman. It is the coolest thing to watch. And so they'll fly down through these mountains and in between the valley area, in the valley between the mountains. And so they just do this crazy stuff, and there's always somebody behind them right on their tail with a camera. It's really cool until they make a wrong turn. Because eventually there are people who die using this. And if you get somebody who is inexperienced, who thinks, I can do this, I've got this, I can control this thing, and they dive off and they go flying in and they haven't paid attention, they haven't learned, they don't know the terrain, or they think they do, and they make a turn, and all of a sudden there's a wall, there's a mountain there, then it's over. And we feel like we can control the sin in our lives. We feel as though, you know what, I got this under control. I've got my arms out. The wind is under my sail here, and I can shoot through and be in total control. And you are until you aren't. And eventually you aren't. Neither this man nor the townspeople had the power to control the demonic forces that terrorized their town. But I want you to look at what happened when Jesus showed up. Look at verses 6 through 8. So it says, when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and knelt before him. And he cried out with a loud voice, what do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you before God, don't torment me. For he had already told him, come out of him, you unclean spirit. So putting this together, what we have is verse 2 introduces us to what happened. Verse 2 tells us that as soon as Jesus got out of the boat, this man came to him. And then 3 through 5 tells us about the man. And then 6 through 8 picks back up with that when he gets out of the boat. And so it gives us more detail. It wasn't that he just got out, Jesus gets out of the boat and the man just kind of saunters up to him. What's up? He runs to him. Or maybe he runs at him. Maybe in his craziness, maybe in this wildness, the man starts to run at him. Because this is a demon that is in full control of this man. And what we have already seen is the demons are trying to intimidate Jesus. They're trying to stop his mission at all cost. And so I don't know specifically how this went, but I know if you see this guy, this raged man who's got cuts all over him, who's clearly crazy, his hair's going nuts, and he's running at Jesus, can you imagine what's going through the minds of the people who are with Jesus? Because what they see is this man running to Jesus, and then at the last moment, whew, because this is not, what is said here, this translation is really not good enough when it says he knelt before him. It's more than that. It literally means to prostrate oneself before a person to whom reverence or worship is due, even kissing his feet or the hem of his garment. Now, I'm not saying that this demon, whatever way in which he came, we just know that he ran to Jesus. I'm not saying he got down and kissed his feet, but I'm telling you this. When demons came face to face with divinity, there was no match. And this guy came prostrate before Jesus because he knew his match had been met. He knew that this was the Son of God. That's what he declared. And I was immediately reminded of what James, the half-brother of Jesus, wrote in his letter. He said, you believe that God is one, good. Right? I mean, that's the beginning of the law. The Lord our God is one. Do you believe that? That's good. He says, even the demons believe and they shudder. Even the demons believe and they tremble. They're terrified. And we get this picture, whether the demon was trying to intimidate him or what, but he gets close to Jesus and he shudders. He gets down on his face and he says two things. What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? What do you have to do with me? You are Jesus, the Son of the Most High God. It's the first time that a demon has identified Jesus publicly without a rebuke. Usually Jesus says, be quiet. But he's in the land of the Gentiles, and for whatever reason, Jesus doesn't say anything about that. But the demon here asks him something along the lines of, why are you interfering with me? Or what are you going to do to me? He knew that there was power that was overcoming him. And then the second thing he says is, I beg you before God, don't torment me. So this demon knows that Jesus has the power and the authority to do just that, to torment him. And so he calls out for mercy in the name of the highest authority that there is, and yet it has no effect because Jesus is the Son of the Most High God. So essentially, the demon is asking Jesus not to cast him into utter darkness or hell because he knows Jesus has the power and the authority to do that. What are you going to do to me? Because there's going to come a time when that exact thing is going to happen, but Jesus knows that time is not yet. And so something else happens instead. Excuse me. And we're told, regardless of what the outcome was going to be, Jesus had commanded the demon to come out of the man. And so the demon knows he's not staying in the man. Because when Jesus says, come out of the man, there's no other alternative except to come out. Now, maybe there's some things that will happen on the outside of the man, but he's not staying in the man. I want you to notice the extent of the power of Jesus over evil to break the bonds of sin over a soul. This demon is expelled simply by the authoritative and powerful word of Jesus. That's it. And the power was not from anything outside Jesus. The power to do this resided in Jesus himself. And then verse 9, Jesus asked about his name. What is your name? He asked him. My name is Legion, he answered him, because we are many. Man, that'll send chills down you. That's like the making of a horror movie. We are many. Right? You see it. You can hear the voice. I don't have the voice, but you can hear the voice, right? I mean, it's just terrifying when, and the guys who were standing there probably, there's like, oh my goodness, there's a legion in there. Because legio is a Latin word that the Romans used to describe their greatest troop group, of their greatest number of troops. And it was 5,600 soldiers. And so what we have, maybe it's not 5,600 demons, I don't know, but the idea is that it is being communicated that there is a lot of demonic activity going on inside this guy, and this is the size and power of demonic activity within him. I mean, no wonder he was so strong, right? No wonder there was so much going on where they couldn't hold him because he had the strength of like 5,600 people. Soldiers, no doubt. Roman soldiers on top of that, and they can take care of a chain. And this is where we are. So there's a lot of things going on in this man's life. And then verses 10 through 13, the pigs come in, right? We get the bacon section. So verses 10 through 13 is where he says the demon begged him earnestly. Right? He didn't command to him. He didn't exercise. He didn't bow up to him. He didn't try to intimidate him. He just begged him. He begged him. There it is. Earnestly not to send them out of the region. A large herd of pigs was there feeding on the hillside, and the demons begged him. Again, we get that word. Send us to the pigs so that we may enter them. So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs. The herd of about 2,000 rushed down the steep bank and into the sea and drowned there. All right, so trying to unpack this is nearly impossible because we're not given all the information that we would need to know the ins and outs of what exactly was going on there. What happened specifically to the demons when the pigs rushed into the water? Why did they want to come out of them? Why did he say this region? What is all happening here? We don't know specifically, but here's what we do know. In spite of the power, the demon offered no challenge at all to Jesus and simply begged for mercy rather than to experience his wrath. Because Jesus had the ability and the authority and the right to express his wrath towards these demons. They asked to stay in the region by way of a herd of some 2,000 pigs here. So, they went out of the man, they went into the pigs, but only after they had been given permission to do so. Again, we get a picture of the sovereignty of God. Jesus gave them permission to come out and move to the pigs. Now, remember, I quoted a few minutes ago the first part of John 10:10. The thief comes only to kill and steal and to destroy. The one thing we know about these pigs is that they were destroyed. That the demons carried out in the pigs what they were unable to carry out in the man. And it is only by the grace and the mercy of Jesus that the demons, the powers of darkness, don't do that to us. It is only because of his staying power, his common grace, that we're not utterly destroyed like the pigs. In verses 14 through 17, then we get a turn. So the pigs run into the water, they die. Now you've got the guys who are herding the pigs. The guys who are herding the pigs now go into the town and the whole region. So we can consider this the whole Decapolis. The word began to spread and people came to see what was going on. They wanted to see what this was that Jesus did. But maybe even more than that, they wanted to see what the heck happened to their pigs. Right? I mean, this is a big deal. So when they get there, they find a man who had been out of control, who had been overcome by evil, who would never have been able to save himself, would not have necessarily been interested in saving himself. Now he's seated at the feet of Jesus, completely transformed. He was dressed, he was looking good. He's like, hey, glad y'all could come. It's a total transformation. The guy who was out of his mind, who was living among the tombs, who had this look about him, because sin does that. It defaces us internally and eventually externally. This thing, if you've got an internal disease and they do an x-ray or they open you up to do some sort of exploratory surgery and they open you up, oh my goodness, this looks horrible. Eventually, it works its way to the outside, and that happens with sin too. Eventually, sin works its way out, and what was ugly on the inside starts to look ugly on the outside. But when it comes face to face with Jesus and there is a transformation and a redemption that happens, now everything becomes reversed. And the external that looks unhappy, that looks frustrated, that tries to put on a smile, that everything's fine, everything's good, but if you can rip that mask off, you're going to see the destruction that has happened, the unhappiness, the brokenness, all of that, which would be on the external if we weren't so good at putting up the masks. Jesus changes all that because he changes all this. And it's amazing transformation. And the reaction of the people was the same as the disciples when Jesus calmed the storm. They were afraid. They were terrified. And these people begged him to leave. They didn't know what to do with this, for one. But you also get the feeling that they were more concerned about their economical dilemma of losing the pigs than in having someone there who could change a dead man to live. Essentially, who could take a man that was completely overwhelmed by a demonic force called Legion and have him completely remade in his right mind, ready to rejoin the land of the living. Think about this. Jesus should have never been there. He should have never been there. By all rights, and according to the law of the land, Jesus should have never been there, but he was. And I want you to see this. I want you to get this. I want you to understand what I'm trying to tell you. Let's think about this. Cursey was an unclean Gentile city. Jesus was in the Gentile Decapolis, automatically just being there would have been a problem. He shouldn't have even been there. He should not have crossed the Sea of Galilee to go into where the Gentiles were living, and there were swine herders there. The law said, or the Mishnah, the written oral law said that none may rear swine anywhere. So there were pigs. Pigs and Jews don't mix very well. No bacon, no ham, no nothing. The demoniac had an unclean spirit. So Jesus, being in the presence of this unclean spirit, would have rendered him unclean. He lived among unclean tombs. He lived among the dead. He had contact with the dead. And so according to the Jewish law, it rendered one unclean for 7 days. So Jesus, being in his presence, along with those who were with him, rendered him unclean. Jesus would have known this going into this region, yet he came and he meets the man where he is. He didn't require the man to clean himself up. He didn't require the man to go and sit outside for 7 days before he decided to come in so that he could then minister to him. He didn't place any demands on the guy at all. He met him where he was, in his brokenness, in his tomb. He didn't require him to convert to Judaism before he delivered him. He came into the uncleanness of the man. He entered into that place. He met him where he was, but rather than Jesus becoming unclean, he cleansed the man in the midst of his brokenness. That's the hardest thing, I think, for us to get our minds around. Jesus doesn't expect you to be cleaned up. He cleans you up. He doesn't expect you to get it all together. He puts you, he gets you together. He didn't say, y'all come out here so I can deal with you. He says, I'm coming in there. I'm going to make an impact. And he completely restored him. And then on top of all of that, if that wasn't enough, Jesus demonstrated the value he placed on this one man. 2,000 pigs represents a pretty sizable portion of the economy. So it would have been a big hit. It would have tremendously affected the livelihood there. It could have been an economic catastrophe. But neither Mark nor Jesus even mention it. They don't give it any thought whatsoever. It's not the focus of anything. They focus entirely on the rescue of the man. James Edwards says, in the eyes of Jesus, the rescue and restoration of one person is more important than vast capital assets. Compared to the redemption of a human being, the loss of the swine herds, considerable though it was, does not even rate mentioning. Jesus' priority was on the person, not the economic upturns or downturns. It doesn't mean that Jesus doesn't care about those things, but in comparison to the life of a person, even one, he's going to pick the person. This cost 2,000 pigs, but much, much more than that. The redemption of that man was ultimately going to cost Jesus his very life. And that's what he did for you. That's what he did for you. He laid down his life so that you could go from the land of the dead into the land of the living. It's not just that you were bad. It's not that you're just bad. It's that you're dead. And that is the illustration of the gospel. That's what the gospel says. We're not all filled with a demonic possession, but we are born spiritually dead, held captive by the powers of darkness. Ephesians chapter 2, one of my favorite chapters and one of my favorite books in my favorite book. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. You were dead in your trespasses and sins. You were not sick. You didn't feel bad. You didn't have a little scuff here and there. You were dead in your trespasses and sin, in which you previously walked according to the ways of this world, according to the ruler of the power of the air, the Spirit, now working in the disobedient. And we all, too, previously lived among them in our fleshly desires, carrying out the inclination of our flesh and thoughts, and we were by nature children under wrath as the others were also. That's a pretty good description of what we've been talking about that this guy was going through and what we all go through. When sin takes us captive, I mean, we're born in captivity. We're born spiritually dead. And if you have not experienced the deliverance of Christ, this means that you're still under the power and the curse of death. That's just a fact. It's a biblical fact. As we wrap up this crazy year, uncertain to what the next one is going to bring, we have no idea what tomorrow holds, I want to encourage you to fall at the feet of Jesus. Cry for mercy. He alone is the one who can give you hope for tomorrow and for eternity. The rest of Ephesians chapter 2, verses 4 and 5 says this, "But God, who is rich in mercy," rich in mercy. I want to stop there for a second. Because a lot of times we talk about God being merciful, but it's hard for us to get our minds around the fact that He's merciful enough to cover our junk. It's hard, isn't it? It's difficult for us to imagine that Jesus could ever forgive me for the stuff I've done, because in our minds and in our hearts, we carry a checklist that has all the stuff that we know we've done, all the things that we have messed up on. If nobody else knows it because we went and hid in the dark, we know it. So how in the world could there be enough mercy to cover that list of stuff? Yeah, we get a picture of Him being rich in mercy. If you're rich in dollars, you have an overabundance of wealth. He is overly rich in mercy. He has an abundance of mercy. Because of His great love that He had for us, made us alive with Christ, even though we were dead in our trespasses, you are saved by grace. Even though it doesn't discount the fact that you were dead in your trespasses. Yes, that's a given. That's a fact. Yes, you have a long list of junk that you have done and lived and maybe still doing. But God, who is rich in mercy, even though we are sinners, even though we're still in the midst of that, at that time, we are made alive. You didn't do it. You didn't do it anymore. You can't do it any more than the guy who had the demons in the tombs could do it. He couldn't do it. The townspeople couldn't do it. Your family can't do it. Your church can't do it. But Jesus can. Jesus, who is rich in mercy and power, can do that. Even though you are dead in your trespasses, you are saved by grace. But more than that, in Christ, you are brought into relationship with Christ. So it's not just that He saves you and then, runs off and says, "You're done, I'm done with you." You're saved by grace, and you are given a relationship that is full of meaning and purpose. Look at verses 18 through 20. And this might sound contrary to what I just said, but it's not if you look at this. As he was getting into the boat, the man who was demon-possessed begged him earnestly that he might remain with him. Stop there just for a second. As he was getting into the boat. All right, so again, I've said this. I want to emphasize this strongly. Jesus came across the Sea of Galilee, went through that horrendous storm, made it to the other side, dealt with one guy, and did what? Got in the boat and went back, or went somewhere else. He got in one guy. I want you to hear that. So I said that so loudly. One guy. It could have been any one of you. That Jesus came and He made an impact. Jesus came to save the soul. Is that really the attitude of Jesus? Can you really believe that if it were just you, if you were that demonic man or if you were a demonic woman, that Jesus would do that just for you, come across the lake and have an effect just for you, and then go on to somewhere else? Matthew 18 makes me think that it's true. It says, what do you think? If someone had 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, won't he leave the 99 on the hillside and go search for the stray. And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he rejoices over that sheep more than over the 99 that did not go astray. In the same way, it is not the will of your Father in heaven that one of these little ones perish. In the same way, Jesus is saying, this is my attitude. In the same way, if one is astray, I care about the one. Nobody that Jesus calls is expendable. None that are his are ever expendable. But this man wanted to go with Jesus, right? That's what we're told here. He begged him earnestly. It sounds like the same language that was used with that demon, right? Begging earnestly just to be put into the swine. Now here we get the same language. He begged him earnestly that he might remain with him. But Jesus didn't let him. Sounds contradictory to what I just said. Jesus didn't let him, but he told him, go home to your own people and report to them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So he went out and he began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and they were all amazed. This man wanted to go with Jesus, but Jesus had other plans. He didn't push the man aside. He said, look, you are with me if you do what I say. And we get that throughout the New Testament. Jesus had said when he was talking to the people in the house, who are those who are my mother and brother and sisters? Who are they? The ones who do the will of the Father. So Jesus is saying, you're in the family if you do what I say, if you obey me. And so Jesus had a mission for him. He gave him purpose. He gave him a reason. And Jesus wasn't worried about the man returning to his old demonic ways, because when the Son sets you free, you're free indeed. Yeah, he's going to sin again, sure, but he's not going to be bound by sin again. He's not going to come back. When Jesus said, you will not enter this man, you get out of this man, it means he will not enter back into this man. Jesus had cleansed him, had made him completely clean. The Son sets you free, you're free. You're only bound by the level of your own unwillingness to embrace grace and forgiveness. I hear that again. The only thing that keeps you bound, if Christ has saved you, is your own unwillingness to embrace grace and forgiveness. And if you don't, and as I've said many times before, I've tried to give you that image of the chains that have bound you, and Jesus has removed the lock, but you just, no way this could be true. This couldn't be real. This can't be. Surely not. Surely he couldn't do this. And yet Jesus has removed the lock, and the lock's not going back on. You just need to embrace the grace that took the lock off, accept the forgiveness that Jesus has given you, and drop the chains. Drop them. They don't bind you anymore. If Christ has set you free, you are free indeed. You are free actually, very much, complete. It's the idea behind that. And Jesus filled the emptiness that this man had with meaning, and he gave the man purpose. He sent him on mission. Go home to your own people and report to them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So what did he do? He did that. He did that very thing. And what was the result? All the people were amazed. See, that's the thing. There are always going to be internal storms that come up in your life. Especially if the enemy starts whispering things in your ear like, you're not worthy of this. Surely you're not really saved. You just went and did that again. Surely you got this wrong. If he only knew what I know, boy, if he knew the list is still there and you're still struggling with it. If the Son sets you free, you're free completely. You're free indeed. And so Jesus knows that you're struggling with that list, but you know what he knows about that? You're struggling. You're struggling. You're fighting the fight. You're fighting the fight against your own flesh to condemn yourself, and you're also fighting the fight that says, these things don't define me anymore. These things have been made complete, and then we lay it before the Father. all over again. Lord, I can't do this. I need the gospel today. I need you to save me. I need you to remind me that I am saved every single day. When those winds pick up, either from the outside or they start to swirl in the inside, where are you running to? Where are you looking for your answers? Where are you trying to find hope and healing and forgiveness and grace? There's only one place that truly offers it. If you've not trusted in Jesus, I want to encourage you to do that today. If you have, but you're still struggling with that stuff, then struggle with other people. Bring it out into the light, because that's where it can be dealt with people who love you and who are not going to throw stones at you or start pushing you back into the darkness. They're going to say, yeah, come on out. Let's go. Come on, we're going to deal with this together. Because that's what God has provided through his church. This is the hope that you have, and this is the hope that you have moving into a new year of so much uncertainty and so many things unresolved that just seem to be getting worse. Don't put your hope in a new calendar year. Put your hope in Jesus. Let's pray.